I did not take Tesla seriously the first time I heard about it, and that confession matters because it puts me exactly where most of the auto industry once stood. Comfortable, confident, and completely blind to what desperation mixed with obsession can do. Back then, electric cars were a joke wrapped in good intentions. Slow, ugly, expensive science projects built to make regulators feel better, not customers excited. Detroit knew how cars were made. Engineers knew physics. Executives knew margins. And then there was Elon Musk, an outsider, with money from software, no legacy to protect, and a dangerous belief that the rules everyone else accepted were optional. That combination has always terrified incumbents, even when they laugh at it. Tesla did not rise because the world was ready for electric vehicles. It rose because the industry had quietly stopped questioning itself. For decades, car companies optimized the same internal combustion equation, shaving costs, tweaking designs, adding features no one asked for, while accepting massive inefficiencies as just the way things are. Gas engines were sacred. Dealerships were untouchable. Software was an afterthought. When Musk stepped into this world, he wasn't trying to build a better car company. He was trying to rebuild the idea of what a car even was, and more importantly, who was allowed to redefine it. What people forget is that Tesla nearly died multiple times. The Roadster was not a triumph. It was a warning shot, fired with borrowed time. Production delays, exploding costs, supplier failures, and skepticism from every corner almost crushed the company before it found its footing. I recognize that phase intimately because it's where optimism goes to be tested. It's easy to pitch a revolution. It's brutal to manufacture one. Tesla's early years were defined not by innovation headlines, but by sleepless nights, missed deadlines, and the constant threat of running out of money while the world waited for you to fail, so it could say, "We told you so." Musk's real disruption wasn't the electric motor. It was his refusal to accept the industry's excuses. Why can't batteries improve faster? Why does software updates stop at your phone? Why do cars get worse over time instead of better? These questions sound naive until someone refuses to move on without answers. Traditional automakers had reasons for everything. Tesla treated reasons as obstacles, not conclusions. That mindset created enemies early because it exposed how much of the industry was operating on inertia rather than conviction. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Tesla's rise is vertical integration. While others outsourced complexity to protect margins, Tesla absorbed it to control destiny. Batteries, software, charging infrastructure, even sales channels all pulled inward. To a seasoned executive, this looked reckless. To a survivor, it looked like leverage. When you control the stack, you control the pace. Tesla didn't want to negotiate the future. It wanted to build it end to end, even if that meant bleeding longer. That choice nearly killed the company more than once, but it also made copying Tesla far harder than mocking it. Then came the Model S, and something shifted. Not because it was electric, but because it was undeniably good. Fast. Beautiful. Desirable. That was the real psychological break. Tesla didn't ask consumers to compromise for the planet. It made sustainability aspirational. That single move humiliated an industry that had spent years telling people they had to choose between responsibility and pleasure. Once customers tasted a car that got better overnight through software updates that accelerated like a sports car and felt like the future inside the old narrative collapsed. You can't unsee that. What followed was not immediate victory, but escalation. As Tesla scaled, the resistance intensified. Short sellers circled. Media scrutiny sharpened. Manufacturing hell arrived with the Model 3 exposing just how unforgiving physical products are compared to code. Musk famously slept on factory floors not as a publicity stunt, but because when production breaks, leadership presence becomes operational, not symbolic. I've been there. When the system is failing, you don't delegate belief. You embody it. Tesla survived that phase, not because it was smooth, but because it refused to slow down, when slowing down felt safer. The auto industry watched all of this with a mix of denial and arrogance. Tesla was still too small. The margins were unsustainable. The quality issues were proof it wouldn't last. Every disruption story sounds the same to those being disrupted. The danger is not skepticism, it's delayed curiosity. By the time legacy automakers began taking electric vehicles seriously, Tesla had already rewritten the rules around software charging ecosystems, direct-to-consumer relationships, and brand identity. Catching up wasn't about building EVs anymore. It was about undoing decades of internal structure designed for a different world. Tesla's rise also exposed a deeper truth about modern industries. Technology companies don't just compete on products, they compete on narratives. Tesla wasn't selling cars alone. It was selling inevitability. A future where gasoline felt archaic updates were expected, and energy was part of a larger system that included solar storage and autonomy. Whether you loved Musk or hated him, you couldn't ignore the gravitational pull of that story. Markets move on belief long before balance sheets catch up, and belief cuts both ways. Tesla became a lightning rod for controversy, not just because of Musk's personality, but because it threatened identities. For engineers who had mastered combustion engines, for dealers whose power was built on intermediating sales, for regulators accustomed to slow change, Tesla was not just a competitor. It was an accusation. It suggested that the limits they accepted were choices, not laws of nature. That is always uncomfortable, and discomfort breeds backlash. By the time electric vehicles became inevitable in boardroom conversations, Tesla was no longer asking whether the industry would change, but how fast. Gigafactories rose. Charging networks expanded. Software became central. Other automakers announced electric roadmaps with urgency that bordered on panic. The narrative had flipped. Tesla was no longer the reckless outsider. It was the reference point. And yet this is where the story becomes more dangerous, because disruption is easier than dominance, and vision is easier than execution at global scale. This is the point in every journey where success begins to test the very qualities that created it, where the pressure shifts from proving the world wrong to proving you can handle being right, and where the real cost of reshaping an industry starts to surface as the sentence continues into the next phase of Tesla's story, where growth power scrutiny and consequence converge. And the question is no longer whether electric vehicles will win, but what kind of company Tesla will become now that it has forced the entire world to follow its lead, and the journey moves forward without pause into the part where electrifying an industry turns into the burden of sustaining it at scale, while everything watches and waits for the next crack to appear, where the victory stops feeling clean and starts feeling heavy. Because once Tesla proved electric vehicles were not a fantasy, but an inevitability, the company was forced to live inside the consequences of its own success. And this is where many disruption stories fracture. When you are the insurgent, you are judged by your intent. When you become the standard, you are judged by your impact. Tesla moved from being a challenge to the auto industry to being a reference point for it, and that shift brought a level of scrutiny and expectation that no amount of innovation could outrun, as production-scaled cracks appeared not in the idea, but in the execution. Quality issues, labor controversies, regulatory clashes, and missed timelines became part of the narrative. Critics who were once wrong about electric vehicles now felt vindicated, pointing at every flaw. This is the price of visibility. When you change an industry, your imperfections become evidence for those who never wanted the change in the first place. Tesla learned, as every company eventually does, that being right does not protect you from being criticized, and growth amplifies both your strengths and your weaknesses without mercy. Elon Musk's role also evolved from visionary catalyst to systemic risk. The same intensity that fueled Tesla's rise began to polarize its perception. Markets moved on his words. Employees felt the pressure of impossible deadlines. Regulators watched more closely. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural reality. When a company's identity is tightly coupled to one individual, that individual becomes both its greatest asset and its most fragile point. Tesla's challenge was no longer just engineering batteries or factories, but institutionalizing belief beyond its founder's persona. At the same time, the rest of the industry woke up. Legacy automakers, once dismissive, began pouring billions into electric platforms. Governments accelerated mandates. Charging infrastructure expanded beyond Tesla's walls. The paradox of winning emerged. Tesla had succeeded so thoroughly that it eliminated the doubt that made it special. Electric vehicles were now everyone's race. Competing as the pioneer is one thing. Competing as one of many while still carrying the expectations of leadership is another entirely. Yet even here, Tesla retained an edge rooted in software and systems thinking. Over-the-air updates, data-driven iteration, and an ecosystem approach to energy kept it operating more like a technology company than a traditional manufacturer. Cars became rolling computers. Factories became machines that build machines. This abstraction layer is difficult to replicate because it requires cultural change, not just capital expenditure. Tesla didn't just electrify drivetrains, it digitized the automobile's DNA. The deeper impact, however, goes beyond market share. Tesla changed what consumers expect. Acceleration became standard. Interfaces mattered. Waiting years for a model refresh started to feel absurd. Charging at home reframed convenience. Even people who never buy a Tesla now live in a world shaped by its assumptions. This is the quiet victory of true disruption. When your ideas become defaults, even your competitors validate you by copying you. But disruption always comes with unresolved questions. Can growth be sustainable without burning out people and systems? Can innovation coexist with safety and stability at global scale? Can a company that thrives on urgency learn patience? Tesla's story is still wrestling with these tensions. There is no clean resolution because the problem is not technical, it is human. Systems move slower than ambition. Cultures resist being refactored, and reality always pushes back. For builders watching from the outside, the lesson is not to idolize or demonize Tesla, but to understand the pattern. Industries are not transformed by consensus. They are jolted by someone willing to be unreasonable long enough to force new norms into existence. But once those norms take hold, the unreasonable must learn to become responsible or risk being replaced by those who can operate within the world they helped create. Tesla electrified the auto industry, not because it had better batteries alone, but because it challenged assumptions everyone else had stopped questioning. It showed that cars could be software first, that energy could be integrated, and that speed of iteration mattered more than tradition. The cost of that challenge was years of instability, controversy, and pressure that few are willing to endure. Most talk about changing the world. Tesla absorbed the consequences of actually doing it. And if there is one truth I carry from watching Tesla's rise through the eyes of someone who has lived through near collapse and hard-won survival, it is this: the future does not belong to those who are polite about change. It belongs to those who are willing to be misunderstood, criticized, and nearly broken in the process of dragging an old system into a new reality. But survival in the end depends on learning when to stop fighting the world and start building something that can live inside it. If this journey made you rethink what real disruption costs, stay with this channel. Subscribe, because this is where we talk about the stories behind the headlines, not just the mythology. And leave a comment sharing what part of Tesla's rise challenged your thinking, because these stories only matter if they push us to question what we are willing to risk when we decide to change the game instead of playing it safely.